Welcome to Move to Combat. I'm James, and here are your hosts, Haley.
What's up, you guys?
And Kenny.
Hey.
What are we talking about today, Haley?
Today we're going to be doing the first installment of our Fundamentals series. We're going to be doing it once a month, and we're going to go over topics that are good for newer players, that are good refreshers for older players. We're going to be deep diving into some topics that are just good for every player to know, and today we're going to be specifically focusing on how a turn of Magic works.
Yeah, we're kind of starting at, the very beginning and working our way up.
I wouldn't call it the very, very beginning because we're assuming you've picked up a deck at this point, probably.
Yeah, and, you played at least one game, I guess.
If you've played a game at your local LGS, they gave you a free welcome deck, or you've played with friends who have given you a deck to play with, or any reason that you picked up a Magic cards. We're assuming you have that base level. We're probably gonna get shit for it later, but that's okay. But we're gonna be going through the deep dive of how a turn works, what the steps of a turn are, when you can respond to them, what happens during each step, each phase, etc.
Yeah, and we're gonna post this on YouTube so that if you need to relearn after watching this, you can just
It'll always be
watch
there as
it
a refresher
again.
for you.
Yep. Breaking down what is now considered the most complicated game in the world. Don't let that freak you out, though. It's pretty simple.
It's really not that bad. We're going to walk you through this step by step. Hopefully by the end of it, you'll be good to go. If not, you can always feel free to contact us and ask further questions, or ask any of the employees at your friendly LGS. They are more than happy to help you at all points in time.
Or if you happen to be watching right now, just post a question up on our chat, and I'll be happy to read it on the air for you.
Oh yeah, we can do that too.
And one disclosure, it is a skill, and it does take practice, so learning the game will come with time, so don't expect to be immediately good at it just by watching this video.
Yeah, no, Magic takes time and practice, and you get as much out of it as you put into it. So if you put the games in, and you sit there, and you practice at it, and you work at it, and you ask the necessary questions, you will get better. It just takes time. Nobody, picked up this game and got it immediately on their first try and was like, I am a pro. Hand me my trophy, please.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, there's no Bobby Fischer that I know of Move to Combat, so Magic the Gathering.
That'd be really nice.
All right, so what's the first thing we're talking about?
So before we completely jump into the steps and how a turn works, we're going to talk a little bit about the basic concepts of just some keywords or stuff that you need to know about what we're talking about, or what you even need to play a game of Magic, starting with your deck.
Yeah, for constructed, usually for just
You may
normal...
want to explain what you mean by constructed.
Sorry.
For
Constructed-
total noobs.
Constructed is a format that is the most common format you play Magic in. It's where you take the cards that you have and you build a deck, as opposed to opening cards from packs and building right then and there.
Which is known as drafting.
Which is known as limited.
Or limited.
Or limited.
So you've got several different versions of limited. They're sealed and draft. We're talking about constructed, which is where you build a deck beforehand and you bring it to the game that you're playing or tournament that you're playing in, as opposed to opening your packs there.
So,
and building
for
your deck
example,
there.
This could be the deck you get at your friendly local game store, a deck you buy out of a deck box from a friendly local game store, or a deck your friend loaned to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's so many options. Any way that you have a deck that is already pre-built going into that game is considered a constructed format.
Yep.
Okay.
So your decks start your main deck. There are two decks that you play the game with. Your main deck and your sideboard. The main deck is a minimum of 60 cards. You could have as many as you want, more than that. And there's actually some cards that care about that. But we're not going to go over those today.
So, yeah, 60 card minimum. You can have as many cards in your deck as you want, just as long as you can shuffle it unassisted.
Yes.
Maximum of 4 cards, which is a playset.
Per
so you can
copy,
have
yeah.
four of each card.
That's not
4
a basic
copies
land.
of the card. That is not a basic land. That is a playset, and that is how many you can have in a deck, with some exceptions. Remember, there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, you can have up to 4 of each card in the deck, and 60 card minimum for the main deck.
Yep. The sideboard is a maximum of 15. So from 0 to 15, you could have... You don't need to build a sideboard, but since most constructed games are best of 3, most people have a set of cards that they bring into their deck, and then for specific like matchups, so they can perform better.
So,
So to clarify, the sideboard is something apart from your deck that you can change out cards between matches to customize your deck to handle certain situations.
correct. So in your 60-card main board, you're not always going to have the perfect setup for every deck that you could possibly play against. So you have a 15-card sideboard that you can switch cards in and out of your main deck in between games to give yourself a little bit of a better matchup against different types of decks.
Yeah, and then we went over 4 copies in 1 card, but normally between matches, you can side out as many cards as you want as long as you stay
Up to 50.
Within
up to
that-
60.
And within that
Side out
rule,
as many cards if you're main up to 60, and then you can side in as many cards as you want without having to take any out.
yes, and your sideboard can't have more than, you can't break the rule where you have 4 of the same kind.
Yeah.
Which is important
Yeah.
to note.
It is 4 copies between both your main deck and your sideboard.
Right.
Yeah, so you can have like 3 copies of a certain card in your main board and then like 3 additional copies in your sideboard. It doesn't work
It'd be
that way.
awesome if you
It's 4
could.
copies across the board. No,
Yeah.
it wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't.
No,
It'd
it
be
would
bad.
not.
We don't want that.
There are many different ways to sideboard. We're not going to go over all of them today. Just know that my favorite personal way to do it is really funny. You just take the whole 15-card sideboard and shuffle it in, and then you take the cards out that you don't want because it confuses people, and it is hilarious.
That way of sideboarding breaks my brain. The most common way is that you're normally going to have a specific couple of cards for each matchup that you think your deck is bad against, then you'll bring in those cards for that matchup.
Yeah.
Right.
So then, how do you win a game of Magic? Well,
So many ways.
so many ways to win a game of Magic, but the most common way to win a game of Magic is to put somebody's life total at 0. And your life total starts at 20, so you essentially have 20 health points. And you would attack the other player either with creatures or you cast spells that do damage to the life total and reduce it to 0. And that is the most common way to win a game of Magic.
Yeah. And be aware that you do not lose until your life is at 0, so life is also a resource.
Yeah, life can be used as a resource. There are many cards, especially in black,
Yeah.
that use your life total as a resource to draw cards or, you know.
Yeah.
One of the best things that somebody told me to think about life total is to think about it, because I come from a background of chess playing, is to think of it as chess clock, like a clock. It literally, your life total tells you how much more of the game you can play. So you shouldn't really necessarily be afraid of, hey, this card sacrifices life, it's bad. Like, you're really just eating up more time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of new players will be paranoid about life sack cards, like, oh, I don't want to die, so I'm not going to play it. And a lot of those cards are really, really good. So
Because you're paying
Right.
either life or you're sacrificing creatures. Or
The only
both.
life that matters is the last one.
Yes.
yes, and getting your opponent to 0.
Same with the cards in your deck. If you do have to draw a card without cards in your deck, you do lose the game.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
that's a strategy that's used as well. It's called mill,
Mill.
and it's one of my favorite strategies.
Yes, if you were to draw a card and are unable to draw a card, you lose the game because you have no cards left to play the game with. So
By the
therefore,
way,
you've been decked and you are out.
Enforcer 5414 says, as he says every week, Baron Von Dito!
That's how we know he's here.
Yeah.
All right.
I think he just keeps saying it till I read it out loud on the screen. So.
No, he says that to let us know that he's there.
Yeah.
He's watching.
It's his
Hi,
hey guys,
Neil.
I'm here.
How are you, sir?
Okay.
But yeah, so next we're going to talk a little bit about the mana pool because that is something that I have commonly noticed confuses newer players the most pertaining to what it is and how it works. So your mana pool is essentially a container that holds your mana for the phase that you're in. So whenever you tap a land to add mana to your mana pool, it goes into the pool and it will be there available to use until you spend it or until the phase ends. So it's like you tap to get money to add to your bank account, and then you use the money from your bank account to pay it out.
I have a fun analogy that I kind of just thought of. The mana pool is kind of like a toilet. It fills up, and then every phase is the flush.
Oh my god, dude.
That's
Really?
cute.
It's
That's totally what.
that's exactly what it is.
See, I've always thought about it more like your mana is your money. You only have so much money you can spend per turn. So when you tap your lands to add money to your bank account or your wallet, however you want to look at it, and whatever is in your mana pool is the mana that is there until you spend it or until the phase ends.
And you spend it on cards that you cast during the game, like spells, creatures, those kind of things.
Yep.
Correct.
And every card has a cost on the top. Usually, it's either a color symbol or a number, and the number can be any color.
Or a combination of both.
Or a combination.
That's called the converted mana cost.
Yep, and the number means you can use any color mana to spend it, and the color, like the symbol, just means that you need that much one mana for each symbol of that color.
So, for example, when we talk converted mana costs, if you have something that is one generic mana and then a red mana symbol, you need to spend at least one red mana to cast that spell, whether it comes from a mountain or any type of dual land. It just needs to be specifically one red mana, and then the one other mana can be one of any color. It's just generic. You can use anything to fulfill that one mana.
Yep.
So, what about the most important thing? Deciding who plays first.
Deciding who plays first. There are many fun ways to decide who plays first. You just do it randomly, however you and your opponent agree to. The most common way to do it is a dice roll.
Yep.
So you roll a dice, you call high roll, low roll. There are also other fun ways that I've seen done, like the old uncards. There's a, paper tiger, rock lobster, and scissor lizard. And so you play rock, paper, scissors with the cards. Some people actually just play rock, paper, scissors. Some people check the converted mana cost of the bottom card, the top card, etc. Any way you decide randomly who goes first.
Yep.
And usually you're playing sets of 3 games, and the loser of the first game gets to decide whether they want to draw or play first on their turn.
Yes.
And then if they lose twice, you lost 2 out of 3, so you're out of luck. But at the last game, the winner of the first game would decide the same thing if they lost.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, going into a turn, we're gonna be going through every step of a turn, all of the phases, when you can react, when you can't react. We will deep dive and properly explain it. We have handy little graphics to help you see what we're talking about as well.
Is that my cue?
That is your cue, James.
That is my cue.
Pull up our handy little graphics.
All right, hold on. All right, okay.
So for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this, we will do our best to go through and explain everything that we have in our graphics. For those of you who are watching visually, enjoy our terrible graphics that we designed.
Yay!
They're so much fun.
They're great.
They're great.
Before we go into this, do you think we should go how the start of the game goes? Drawing hands and moving
Mulligan
past
roll. That might help.
That seems important.
Kenny, I had this discussion with you before we started tonight.
I didn't think of it
then.
then. I apologize.
forgot it. That's okay. We will talk about the important...
Thank you, James.
Well, why didn't you say anything?
Yeah,
you got the paper sitting
They
in
don't
front of you,
invite me
just
to the
like
meetings. I'm just the lowly sound guy.
We had plenty of time before this started for you to look over the script.
Sorry.
So deviating a little bit. Yes.
It's my fault.
Okay.
It's all my fault.
It is all your fault. You should
It's always all
you
your
should
fault.
be ashamed of yourself. So, you start a game with 7 cards in your hand. You shuffle your deck. You draw 7 cards. Now, what happens if you don't like those 7 cards?
You usually throw them back and then take 1 card less. So if you throw back 7 cards, you're going to take back 6. If you throw back 6, you'll take back 5.
Yeah, so you mulligan down until you get a hand. You draw 1 less card each time that you mulligan until you find a hand that seems playable. But a cool thing is now you can scry the card on top of your deck, which means you can, once you decide you're keeping the hand of whether it be 6 or 5 or 4 or however many you had to mulligan down to, once you decide you're keeping that hand, you get to look at the top card of your deck, decide if you want to play it or not, and if you do, you keep it on top of your deck, so it'll be your first draw, and if you don't, you can just slide it to the bottom of your deck.
Yep.
Gives you a little bit of draw advantage when you learn to play, not when you learn to play. Gives you a little bit of a draw advantage
when you had to
throw a hand back because you're already at a card disadvantage. So it'll give you a little bit of an advantage going into your first turn.
And when you play with multiple people at the same time, usually you get 1 free mulligan. which means you throw back one time. If you throw back 7 cards, you get 7 cards back.
Yes, that is when you're playing with 2 or more opponents at the table. You get free mulligans, because who doesn't love free mulligans?
Yay!
Unless, of course, you're just playing with friends and nobody cares about mulligans, and then you just
nobody
draw
really
until you have a
cares.
playable hand, because Magic is more fun when you can actually play Magic.
Like when you can have fun.
Yeah, when you can have fun. But going into the beginning phase, so the beginning phase has 3 parts to it, the untap, upkeep, and draw phases. So starting with the untap phase, you just untap all of your tap permanents. So any, if applicable, obviously you're not going to do it on your first turn because you don't have any permanents on the field. But if you tapped a land for mana to pay a cost for a card, if you tapped a creature to attack, if you tapped an artifact for an ability, at the beginning of this untap step, all of your stuff will go back up into unexhaust mode, so it's ready to play again.
Yep. And tap just means the card is turned
Turn 90
sideways.
degrees, yeah.
Yep, you turn it 90 degrees to show that it's exhausted.
Yep. Sometimes you'll see a partial turn sideways, and that usually works as well, but usually it's just a full tap sideways. And then...
Depends on who's playing, how
Yeah,
they tap
it just depends on the player. But yeah, that's really it.
I mean, yeah, it's untap
it's
step is
pretty
pretty
simple.
self-explanatory. You just have to remember to do it because untap happens first. The upkeep step, a lot of people I've noticed have trouble understanding what the upkeep step is, and I think it's because they haven't played with cards that have an upkeep trigger.
Yeah.
So they don't quite understand where it fits into everything.
I think it's kind of... the best way to explain it is kind of a...
Pre-draw.
pre-draw. It's a preparation step.
Yeah.
You cards that do something there, they exist there as instead of like at your main phase.
Yeah, so a card will tell you if you have an upkeep trigger. It will specifically say it. For example, we have a couple examples up on the screen. Argyle's Bloodfast. It has an ability that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 5 or less life, you may transform it, so it would flip. So this would happen on your upkeep step. You untapped all your stuff, you go to your upkeep, you check your life total, you've got less than 5 life, you are now able to flip that card if you so choose.
Yep.
Or example, Charnel Troll. He is a creature that has an ability that says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on him, otherwise you sacrifice it.
Yeah, and then some things just don't untap on your untap step, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, they have a trigger that decides whether you can untap them or not.
Correct. So yeah, it's just anything that tells you when your upkeep happens, you can do this, would happen during this step. If you have multiple upkeep triggers, they go on the stack in the order that you choose. So for example, if you had both the Charnel Troll and the Argyle's Bloodfast on the field at the same time, you would decide if you want to flip Argyle's Bloodfast first, or if you want to exile a card from your graveyard to put a +1/+1 counter on it.
Because it's happening simultaneously, so you
Yeah.
get to choose which order that happens in.
Correct.
It is important to note that the untap step happens, or the upkeep step happens before the draw step, so before you see your next card.
Yes, very
Yes.
important to note that. So
Is
it's
there a
always
men-
untap, upkeep, draw. In that order, very specifically. That's how you have to
Yeah,
follow
there's
it.
a lot of cards like Search for Azcanta, for instance, that trigger before you draw that might tell you what your next drawn card is. So
Yeah,
it's
so for
very
example,
important
for those
to
of you
not
who
draw.
don't know, Search for Azcanta is a card that allows you to scry one at the beginning of each of your upkeeps. So, much like the Mulligan.
It's not necessarily a scribe because it throws the card away.
Okay, so it's more of
It's something
It's a
like
surveil.
It's a surveil. And what we mean by that is, so you get to look at the top card of your library before your draw step. If you like it, you leave it there. If you don't, you throw it to your graveyard.
Yeah.
It is a surveil
And if you
ability.
could do that if you could do that after you draw, that would kind of give you 2 cards. So you need to do that in your
Well,
upkeep.
no, because it puts it on top.
It
right?
puts it on top.
Right,
It keeps
right,
it on top. It
right.
doesn't give you 2 cards.
It would be
But-
more like a delayed draw.
Delayed draw. But
Yeah.
either way,
Yeah.
it's important to do it in the order that it says you
You're
do.
essentially stacking your deck for what you want to do. If you have a spell that you need, you leave it on top. If, say, you've got 15 lands on the board,
And your top card's a land.
your top card's a land, well,
Throw
then you
that
just throw
in
it in
the
the graveyard.
trash.
Izzy knows this well.
Yeah. Little too well. Nobody should have, 32 lands on the board, turn 7. It just doesn't work that way. But it is important to note, too, that on the upkeep step, Any player can cast instants or sorceries or activate activated abilities at this point in time.
Yep, and usually your opponent can't do anything on your upkeep until you do something. They have to be able to respond to what you're doing. So they can respond to you going to move to the next phase, or you doing something with one of your cards.
Yeah, usually yes. That's not always entirely the case. For example, like on your upkeep, I could opt.
Yeah.
So that would be like I can play a spell that allows me to scry one and draw one. But you can cast instants here. You can activate activated abilities that can be activated at instant speed. And also at the end of your upkeep step, your mana pool will empty. So if you paid any mana into any abilities before this, if you have any unspent mana, it will empty out of your mana pool and it'll just be gone at the end of this step.
Yep, and that's the same for all phases. Mana doesn't...
Not the same for all phases.
Well...
Not every phase does that. We've specifically noted the ones that do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the untap step doesn't really apply. Yeah.
But I wanted to extend it to flash creatures could also be played on upkeeps as well.
That is correct.
Yes.
Which is an instant speed spell.
Yes.
So flash just gives something the ability to be played at instant speed.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, moving to the draw step as James so eagerly wants us to.
It's my favorite step.
Drawing cards is how you win games.
Yeah, your draw step is your one free draw per turn. There are spells that draw you cards in a turn, so you can draw multiple cards per turn, but this is the one card that you guaranteed draw every turn. You draw the card off of the top of your library and add it into your hand.
Yep. It's really simple. No, I don't think anything else really happens here on your draw step except for other effects that specifically say that.
Yeah, it is important to note, though, how the first draw phase would change if you were playing a single-player game versus a multiplayer game.
That's true. If you were to go first in a multiplayer game, you draw a card. But if you go first in a single-player game, you do not draw a card.
So, meaning if you are playing a game with one opponent, if you are on the play, so you go first in that 1v1 game, you would not draw a card on your first turn. However, your opponent would draw a card on their first turn.
Yep.
But if you're playing with two or more opponents, then you get to draw a card on your first turn, regardless of what turn order you go in.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the pre-combat main phase, this is where most of your turn happens.
Yeah. Usually on one of the two main phases that take place during your turn.
Yeah, so this is, you get a main phase before combat and a main phase after combat. So this, your pre-combat main phase. I need to slow down. I can speak like a normal human being, I promise. You can play a land for a turn. You can only play one land per turn, but you can play it on your main phases. So you can either play it on this main phase or the second main phase.
Yep. Most creatures can only be played on main phases, as well as planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, and sorceries.
Yes, anything that is cast at sorcery speed is... So, whatever you can play during your main phase is considered a sorcery speed spell.
Mm-hmm.
And it can only be played on your main phase with very few exceptions, as always.
And you can only play it when there is no other spell resolving, which means the effect isn't still happening. So if
Could you elaborate on that?
So if someone goes to play a spell on your turn, or you're playing a spell, you cannot also play Gideon Blackblade while that spell is still resolving, which means that the effect is still going on.
Correct.
Right.
So that's what sorcery speed means.
Mm-hmm. Also, on your main phase, you can also activate Planeswalker abilities.
Mm-hmm.
You can only activate them once per turn as well, but it can be done on either of your main phases. It doesn't have to be on this one, but you may activate Planeswalker abilities here. And also, once again, any player can cast instants spells during this time. They can activate activated abilities, and your mana pool will empty at the end of this step.
Yep.
Moving to combat.
Hey.
Move to combat! Combat is probably one of the more complex parts of a turn that a lot of people
I'd say it's the most complex
trouble.
part.
Yes. Technically has 5 parts to it.
But don't get intimidated, it's fun.
Yeah. It's fun.
It's funplex.
It's funplex.
A lot of the little parts happen really without you noticing.
Right.
Or without you taking active
Yeah, a lot of
mind
people,
of it.
when you start playing it, you just kind of do it naturally. But we're going to be breaking down each individual step and explaining how it works, why it works the way it does, and just generally breaking it down. So at the beginning of combat, once again, when you declare that you're moving to combat, any player can respond to that with an instant or an activated ability, and then your mana pool would once again empty once you get past the beginning of combat phase. Alright, moving on to declaring attackers.
Okay.
So,
it's like lands. You tap your creatures, and you say this creature is attacking either the player, your opponent, or a planeswalker they control.
correct. You can target either of them. So during this phase, you declare all of your attackers essentially at once. So within this phase, you get to choose which creatures you're attacking with and what target they are attacking, whether it be the player or one of their planeswalkers. And typically you indicate which creatures are attacking by tapping them and turning them 90 degrees, unless they have vigilance, of course.
Vigilance means that they don't tap to attack, and usually when you indicate you're attacking with a vigilance creature, you just push it forward.
Yeah, that's typically the most direct way to indicate that you are attacking with a creature with vigilance. Like I said, you do it all at once, so there is no, like, I'm choosing an attacker, I'm choosing a blocker, then I'm choosing attacker.
Yeah,
like, I want to, or like, oh, I changed my mind, I want to attack with this guy also because you're not blocking, etc. All of the attackers are declared right here
at the same time,
phase. At the same time.
Yep.
Also, once again, cast instance, activate abilities, your mana pool empties at the end of the step.
Yep.
So then you would go on to the declare blockers phase. Just like the declare attackers phase, you declare all of your blockers at once.
Yes. This is for the defending player usually, but your block declaration is all at the same time.
Correct. So the defending player chooses which of their creatures are going to be blocking which of the opponent's creatures that are attacking.
Yep.
So, for example, say your opponent swung 2 Merfolk Tricksters, which is a 2-drop 2/2 creature. For the purpose of this, he is just a 2/2 creature that is tapped and attacking. And say, I have a Llanowar Elf, which is a 1/1 creature, and a Direfleet Daredevil, which is a 2/1 creature with first strike. They have swung with both the Merfolk Tricksters, and I am choosing to block with both my Llanowar Elf and my Direfleet Daredevil. I take both those cards, and I indicate which card that I would want to block each one with.
Yeah.
Or if you're not blocking, you
can
Or
decide
if
not
I'm
to
not
block a
blocking, you just
specific
declare
creature.
that you're...
Yep.
You can block, when you're blocking too, you can choose multiple blockers for one creature. For example, if they're swinging like a 7/7 into you, you can choose 3 of your creatures to block it and potentially kill it if you so choose.
Yep.
You can block, a creature can only, you can block as many, or put as many creatures blocking one creature at the same time.
Correct.
I'm trying to verbalize it.
Took you a second to get there, but it's all good.
So any number of creatures can block one creature, but a single creature cannot block 2 creatures at the same time. So
Correct. So I can't use my Llanowar Elf to block,
block both.
For
the
example,
Merfolk
I can't
Tricksters.
block both of the Merfolk Tricksters with one of my Llanowar Elves, but I could block one of the Merfolk Tricksters with both the Direfleet Daredevil and the Llanowar Elf, and just let the other one go through. You can also just choose to not block at all if that's what you so choose.
Yep.
But, and then once again, any player can activate instants at this time, they can activate activated abilities, and your mana pool will empty at the end of this phase as well.
Yep.
So then, first strike damage occurs. This is a concept that, once again, I've noticed a lot of newer players have trouble with, so we're going to break it down slowly, and we're going to try and make it make as much sense as possible. First strike damage does not happen in every combat phase. You would skip this step if there are no creatures with first strike or double strike present in the current combat situation. So for this example, we have Direfleet Daredevil, which is a 2/1 with first strike. First strike means you hit first. This happens before normal combat damage would happen. So it hits before the creature even has a chance to hit it, period. And just like that, double strike would deal first strike damage first, and then it deals normal damage, so it would hit the first time before.
The Merfolk Trickster would take 2 damage because the Direfleet Daredevil has 2 power and first strike.
Correct.
The Direfleet Daredevil would then take no damage because the Merfolk Trickster has 2 power, but it does not have first strike.
Correct.
And it's already dead.
Well, the damage phase, there's like a damage phase after the first strike damage, and then there's a normal damage phase.
Right.
But yeah.
It's dead. So
Yeah, it dies before it can...
Yeah,
because it doesn't do damage during
Merfolk
first strike
Trickster
damage.
didn't live to hit back. He just instantly died. Direfleet Daredevil goes in, gets the hit out, and KOs the Merfolk Trickster before it even had a chance.
Yep.
So it effectively deals its 2 damage. My Direfleet Daredevil lives to see another day. The Merfolk Trickster is gone.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Once again, on this step, at any point in time, any player can cast an instant or activate an activated ability, and your mana pool will once again empty at the end of this step. Then you would move on to normal damage. Normal damage is the one that you're probably going to be dealing with most frequently. Not everything is first strike or double strike, and you will not always have first strike or double strike in your deck. So once again, if you don't have that, you would skip straight to this step where they deal normal combat damage, and each creature deals it to each other.
At the same time.
Correct.
So, at the same time, the Llanowar Elf will take 2, and the Merfolk Trickster would take 1. The 1 damage will persist until the end of the turn.
Yes, correct. Any damage that a creature takes will stay on that creature until the end of the turn. So the Merfolk Trickster, for example, is taking 1 right now. If you had a way to deal another 1 damage to it somehow, say by playing an instant or activating an activated ability, you would be able to do so and kill the Merfolk Trickster.
Yep.
Because it would take 2 damage total throughout the turn. Once again, your mana pool will empty at the end of the step, and at any point in time you can play an instant or activate an ability.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then you
should we have also explained Menace in the attack phase? Or?
No, because
I think it counts as an exception.
Okay, we'll skip that then.
Yeah, we weren't going to go over all the abilities. The reason why First Strike and Double Strike are so notable talking about these steps is because of the fact they affect how combat steps work.
Gotcha.
Well, they have a whole step in the combat section.
They had a whole step into the combat phase.
Right. That makes
So yeah, it's part of how a turn works because it does add that phase, and it is important to know. Even though you won't use it all the time, it's important to know that it exists.
Right.
Okay. End of combat is kind of a cleanup period.
I would say it's more of like I'm letting you know that I'm moving to the next phase of my turn.
Yeah.
Just like when you would
Like
move to combat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just when you move to combat, you're letting people know that you're changing phases, and that is actively what is happening, so you have a chance to respond to it. Much like that, you can respond to the end of combat somehow. Like I said, for example, say I have a shock or something that can deal the extra point of damage to the Merfolk Trickster. Shock deals 2 damage to any target. I would be able to hit the Merfolk Trickster now. I could have hit it at like when damage was being dealt. It's a way to know that you're moving phases and that you can cast responses to moving those phases, or you can react to stuff happening, or just so you like generally know what's going on within the game.
Yeah.
So then you would move on to your post-combat main phase. Very similar to your pre-combat main phase, you can do everything that you could do then, do it differently. So, for example, if you haven't played a land already at this turn, you can play a land now.
Yep. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Kenny. No, you're good.
I was just going to say that common practice for specifically lower to the ground aggressive decks will do their combat phase and then play stuff in this phase instead of in the first main phase.
Correct.
So that your opponent doesn't react to it as well.
Yeah, there's sort of an art to playing stuff in your second main phase as opposed to your first main phase. Like Kenny said, aggressive decks tend to swing first and ask questions later. So if you swing first, you can force them to try and react to their creatures and so on, try and draw out some of their removal there, make them spend their mana on the creatures that you already have on the field versus what you could do after, because then that could potentially open you up to, like, say something like a Goblin Chainwhirler, where he's a 3-mana 3/3 first strike. When he enters the battlefield, he deals 1 damage to each opponent, each creature or planeswalker they control. That could be useful, because if you swung first and they blocked your little dude with one of their slightly bigger dudes, it deals an extra damage. That could potentially kill them. It potentially, you tap down their mana, so they played something to kill one of the creatures you already played, so now they wouldn't have the mana to counter your Goblin Chainwhirler.
Cards that care about whether a creature attacked this turn, like Charter Course.
Yes.
which if you played it before attacking, you would just discard one of the card or a card from your hand instead of keeping both of the cards that you drew, and just being 2 cards up instead of 1. But if you had attacked with the creature, you get to draw 2 cards and then keep all of the cards in your hand.
As opposed to discarding 1.
Yeah.
So it's more strategic. That's a sorcery speed spell to play it on your second main phase because it gives you all the more card advantage.
Yeah.
Now, if you're really desperate, you don't have any creatures, obviously, it's not bad to play it on your first main phase.
Or if you're trying to
and
dump
cycle
something in the graveyard, like the Eternalized deck.
Well, yeah.
Yep, or you're trying to dump something in your graveyard specifically, playing it during your first main phase is absolutely fine, but for decks who need the card advantage because they're dropping, like aggro decks that are dropping cards left and right, it's a perfect time to play your second main phase because it gives you 2 more cards to your hand.
Yep. You can also activate Planeswalker abilities.
Or play more Planeswalkers.
Or play more Planeswalkers. And as Haley said, lands could be played in this main phase as well. I actually really enjoy with aggro decks to wait on your land drop so that they don't think you have the land to play the next card that they think you're curving out into.
Correct, so that's another good strategy. Like, once again, if we're using Goblin Chain Whirler as an example, it's 3 red mana. If I only have 2 red mana on the board and I swing into you, you're a lot less likely to hold up for a counterspell on the chance that I'll drop that 3rd land because you're not seeing it yet. Magic is very much a mental game like that, so you would want to try and play to your advantages as much as you possibly can. So if you wait till your second main phase or your post-combat main phase to play that 3rd land, they're a lot less likely to hold up the counterspell because you might not have that 3rd land. Additionally, it makes you look like you have more cards in your hand, so that you might have more answers. So you might not have that land, but you could have a kill spell, you could have a counter spell.
Yeah, if you're in blue with a hand of like 6 cards and 2 lands in play, they could think, 3 of those cards could be lands, but they could think like 2 to 3 of those cards are counter spells instead.
Right.
So
of something that I think we should mention, because I see some new players have confusion with this. When you cast a Planeswalker, you can use its one of its abilities on that turn.
Correct.
It's not like monsters or creatures, where when you cast them, they can't attack on that turn. Like, you can use their loyalty abilities immediately. So, because I've seen a couple new players not understand that.
Yeah.
Correct. Planeswalkers, you can use them the turn that you play them. But once again, you can only use that ability once per turn at sorcery speed, so you can activate that ability on either one of your main phases. Just like that, yeah.
Yeah. Creatures, when you play them, normally have something called Summoning Sickness, which stops them from attacking the turn they're played. It's a way that the people who design the game slow the game down a little bit and make it more fair for people who haven't played anything yet.
Correct.
So there are some exceptions, but we're not going to go over it today.
Yeah.
But most creatures do have to wait a turn. Everything else does not.
Yep.
Yes.
Next phase?
Next phase, moving into the end step. The end step, sometimes you hear it referred to as the cleanup step, which is interesting because the end step actually has 2 different phases in it. It has the end phase and the cleanup phase.
Just most of the time, stuff doesn't happen during the end step and they skip right to the cleanup phase. There are some exceptions, which we're going to go over today.
Yeah, so at this point in time, you would declare that you're moving to end your turn, just like you would declare that you're moving to go to combat or moving to end combat.
Yep.
You're moving that you're about to end your turn so that they have a chance where they can respond or activate their abilities at this point in time. But there are also cards that play off of the end step.
Wilderness Reclamation untaps all the lands that you had tapped for mana that turn, so now you have all your mana untapped for your opponent's turn. And then
You've got like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, who's a Planeswalker, where his +1 ability says you can draw a card, and at the beginning of your next end step, you would untap 2 lands. So, like, if you do it during your first main phase, your pre-combat main phase, you get to draw your card then. And then at the beginning of your end step, so when you declare that you're moving to end your turn, you get to untap those 2 lands that you choose, so you have mana for your opponent's turn.
Yep, and we've brought up Opt already a couple times.
Yes.
It's one of those spells that you do on your opponent's turn when it only costs 1 mana, and it lets you scry 1 and then draw a card. Instant spells like that are generally, if you don't have anything that you have to do to respond to your opponent, you'll usually, if you're in blue, play something like that to get another card for your next turn.
Correct. Yeah, end step, if you haven't done something during your opponent's turn while they're playing, like you haven't had to play a counter spell, you haven't had to play a removal spell, not a lot happened, their end step is the perfect time for you to play cards like Opt or any other instant that gets you some sort of advantage at the end of your turn. Yep. So anything that allows you to scry through the top cards of your deck, or move them around,
bounce a creature,
or flash in a creature that you have, so you can swing with it on your next turn.
Trickster's another great example.
Yeah, Merfolk Trickster, the card we talked about earlier, he has an ability called Flash. So if I'm playing against Kenny, and Kenny doesn't do anything on his turn, and I still have 2 blue mana open, at the end of his turn, I can flash in Merfolk's Trickster, so he'll come to the battlefield, and then it would move to my turn, so then I'd be able to swing with him on that turn.
Yep.
It's just little stuff that'll give you an advantage over your opponent by being able to play on their end step if you didn't have to do something during their turn, or you had that extra mana to be able to do something during their turn.
Yeah.
And usually, like, when they pass their turn, you say, on your end step, I'm casting blah, blah.
Or
that
in response.
In response to passing your turn. Right.
Yeah, typically that's a lot of what you'll hear when somebody moves to play an instant like that anyways. Like you say, like, moving to combat, somebody will say, in response. Are you moving to combat?
Yeah, stuff like in response, I have responses.
Yeah, I have responses. Anything that'll let your opponent know that you're going to cast a spell before they move on to the next phase. And that's why it's important to know these phases, because if you were to just go, like, straight into combat and say, like, all right, combat, I'm swinging with all this stuff, you just took away my chance to be able to either say, no, you can't do that, or, like, for example, if I could tap down some of your creatures so they weren't swinging. But additionally, you just gave your opponent a lot of information, so they will still have the chance to respond. Just because you skipped over steps doesn't mean they can't respond. You would have to go back to untapping them. Now I know what creatures you want to attack with, so now that's information I can use against you. So if I can bounce a creature back to your hand, or tap down a creature, I know which creature is more specifically to target.
Yeah, and as
because of that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kenny.
When I was first really getting into Standard, I played a deck that was blue and white and had most of the creatures had flash.
Oh, that deck was stupid.
And I had to pay very close attention to my opponent's turn because I wasn't playing things on my turn. Right. I had to make a point of them telling me when they had to move to combat because there were specific creatures in there that when I played them, they tapped something down. Or I had to respond by bouncing something. Or playing a creature with flash that I could then sack to make my creatures indestructible and then block appropriately. Right.
Yes.
It's actually, if you get a chance to play a flash deck, I would say take that opportunity because you have to pay very, very close attention to how the makeup of a turn works.
Yeah, as a control player, I play on other players' end steps a lot.
You're playing instance on your turn. Yeah. You're playing instance wrong.
You're playing wrong, yeah.
You're playing it wrong or you're losing the game. One of the two.
Yeah, so, very good concept to keep in mind.
Yeah, and then the last one, moving on to the cleanup step. The cleanup step is where a lot of...
it's the end.
Yeah, it's like the end of your turn. So it's like you said you were going to end your turn, and the cleanup step kind of happens like when your turn is ending. This is all the stuff that you do at the end of your turn to basically set things back to normal.
Yeah.
So, for example, like the Merfolk Trickster that we used as an example earlier, it took 1 damage in combat. It had nothing else to deal it damage to kill it. Now it would heal that damage, and this is the step in which that would happen.
Yep. Things that say until end of turn, like Adamant Will, that indestructibility will end at the end of during cleanup.
Yeah, so Adamant Will says target creature gets +2/+2 and gains indestructible until end of turn. This is when the end of turn happens, so it will no longer have the +2/+2 and indestructible. That will fall off at this moment.
Most effects you can't interact with during the cleanup.
Correct.
Just because it's just a static thing that happens.
One thing to note is that cleanup is one of the things that you cannot typically respond to. So it's not one of those things where it's like, at this cleanup step, I can play an instant or sorcery. Once cleanup happens, cleanup is happening.
Yeah, and I think the only active thing that happens where the player has to do something is when their hand has more than 7 cards in it, which is the typical maximum hand size.
Yes.
Where they have to discard back down to 7.
Yes, at the end of your turn, you can have no more than 7 cards in your hand, with the exception of you have stuff like a land called Reliquary Tower, where it says you have no maximum hand size. In that case, you wouldn't have to discard down to 7. However many cards you have in your hand is how many cards you have in your hands. But typically, if you don't have a card with that sort of effect, yes, you would have to discard back down to 7 at the end of your turn. And you would choose which cards you want to get rid of out of your hand. I thought it was interesting one time. I don't know if this is a common problem, but I did see someone, like, try and pass their hand, like, across the table one time, be like, pick the cards that I'm discarding. I was like, that's not how that works.
I mean, if they
That'd
want
be
to,
stupid
if they
if it was
want
how
to
that
do it
worked.
like that, they can. But
No,
normally,
you choose the cards that you
normally
get
you
to
choose
keep in
the
your hand,
cards.
and you choose the cards that go to your graveyard.
I
Just
don't-
as a general note.
I don't think you want them chosen randomly.
No, I don't think you do either.
Or by your opponent. Here, look
Or
at my
by
hand.
your opponent, yeah. No.
Well, no, he did it so like the card backs were still facing the opponent, but like
Oh,
had
okay.
him,
I
like,
thought he
be
literally
random.
showed
Have
him
him,
his
like,
hand.
pick
No,
randomly
Which
it's not-
cards do you want me to have?
It's not a random discard. You pick the 7 cards that you want, you discard the rest.
Yeah,
Right.
there's no randomness about it. It's like, oh, I've got 8 cards in my hand. I have 7 lands on the table. My highest drop in the deck is a 3-drop. Yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and pick that extra land out of my hand and toss it in my graveyard.
You would
So
use that example.
I would use that example because it's a problem that I frequently have. I don't know anybody that draws more lands than I do, and it's quite
It's
hurtful.
odd.
It's very hurtful. General note, fun side story. I was playing at a pre-release, and my deck had 17 lands in it. 17 lands in the whole 42 card deck, because I break that rule too and I play more than 40 cards. And you want to know how many of those lands I saw during that game?
12?
17.
14? 13?
15.
Oh, 16.
There you go.
16.
16 of 17 lands. I
So-
don't know if I'm more impressed that I saw 16 lands or that I lived to see 16 lands.
Well, you know, you got to remember that Magic is partially a random game.
It
so,
is, yeah.
Yeah, so luck is a factor in the game. So you can't get too salty. You can get salty.
Oh no, I
but
can
you can't
get salty.
too salty.
See, I
when
can't
it
get too
happens.
salty if it happens to me once. I can get too salty if it happens to me every single time I play Magic and math just doesn't work around me.
Probability curves.
Probability, it's like here's probability. It's like the normal level for everybody, and then it reaches Haley, it's like whoop, and it's like nope, and then it comes back up to that.
Got a big if statement, like if Haley, ruin probability, else work normally.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Your luck swings pretty hard sometimes.
just a little bit.
By the way, Enforcer 5414 says Baron von Vito backwards, to which I will say Zdrawcab Gnikaeps Ma'ai.
Why?
I'm actually kind of impressed that you did that so quickly.
I used to type backwards all the time as an exercise to type because I was bored.
All
I could
right.
type 90 words per minute. I'm fun at parties. Invite me to them.
I'm
boy.
impressed.
I'm pretty impressed too, to be honest. But so that is all the steps that happen in a turn of a game of Magic, and it's
You just do it all again on your opponent's turn. You're just on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Every turn will go pretty much strictly the same. But it's important to know these steps, and I think just as like a basic etiquette rule, it's also polite to announce each one of these steps, like as you're doing it. Maybe not like the untap, upkeep, draw, because once you get that in your head, you understand how untap, upkeep, draw works. But like Kenny said earlier, when you're moving to combat, sometimes it's very important to say that you are moving to combat, because people can have responses.
I mean, I've been playing for a long time, and I still say
Well, when you're
untap,
moving to phases, yeah.
upkeep, draw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do
Move to
too.
combat.
Inside my head, not out loud, but I do.
I
all
do
the
it
time.
out loud because I need to hear it myself to remind myself what phase I'm on.
Especially
to be
when there's a
honest.
lot going on, it's easier to just break it down phase by phase.
Yeah, I know personally that when I'm playing, some people I find don't take as kindly to it as others when you try to explain everything that you're doing. But once again, people, this is a game, and I'm not explaining what I'm doing to talk down to you. You're explaining what you're doing, so it's for stuff like this. So if you can have a response to me moving to combat, or etc.
Yeah.
I feel like it's polite just to say, like, hey, what's going on? Because not everybody knows every card in the game, so they might not know what you're playing. They might not know what you're doing
Right.
or understand how
Or
a
the
certain thing
interactions
works, or
you're
the
using.
interactions work. 'Cause they're all... once again,
Or vice versa,
not to
yeah.
scare anybody off for any reason, but Magic is a complex game, so not everybody understands every interaction. So I think it's important and polite to explain what you're doing, how you're doing it, what phase you're moving to. Are you done with a phase?
It's
I think
a
it
form
should-
of sportsmanship.
I think it
Correct.
should be said too that the explanation we gave today, even though it's important and we go through all the steps all the time, there are easier decks to play than other decks. So it's not to say that new players should only play easy decks. I don't
No.
believe in that.
No.
But if you find yourself overwhelmed with the rules and just like, I want to attack all the time with big creatures, then you want to play a Gruul deck. You know, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's a strategy in the game for everyone. Whether you want to
Yeah.
be really into interactions and technical stuff, like Kenny plays really interactive decks a lot.
Haley
or
plays,
Haley
nobody
plays-
else can play Magic
Haley
decks a
plays,
lot.
nobody else can play Haley's decks, complicated level decks.
Haley plays Let's Roll the Dice.
Haley
and
plays
I-
Jank.
Yeah, and I'm
It
kind of
takes
in between.
Jank is a special skill to learn how to play.
I play very focused decks. I play like one major strategy that
Yeah,
I'm
you
trying
really
to
like
accomplish.
very linear sequences.
Yeah, I like things that build up on themselves like Rube Goldberg machines and get out of control. So,
Yeah.
you know,
There
that's
are
kind of
hundreds
there's
of different
so
playing styles, hundreds of
Yeah.
different deck
There's as
styles.
many
You
as-
just have to find what works for you.
yeah, there's as many decks as there are people playing them. So,
Correct.
You know, so don't get disheartened by that.
No, and I know so many Magic players who just started playing with a mono red deck because mono red is one very good and very consistent. As much as we like to tease people who play mono red decks because
It is very
it's
good.
play
It's very
dues and swing. It's
aggressive.
very straightforward, but it's very aggressive. It's very good, but it's also very easy to learn because it does have a pretty linear playing style where it's like you're doing pretty much the same thing over and over. That's a really good place for new players
and
to start, so that you have that repetitiveness and
Yeah.
you're understanding how these things work, and
But-
it's not super overwhelming with all these interactions.
I would also say mono red has a pretty high ceiling as well because there's that specific rhythm that you fall into.
Correct.
Right.
And you have to find for each red deck when it's responding to its matchup.
Correct.
See, I can't stand mono red because the whole time I'm like, gotta win this turn, like biting my
I
nails.
love playing mono red. It's a lot of fun.
Mono red is
But
can be
like
very
like
fun.
I said, you know, no one's gonna criticize you if you play Boros, except for maybe Haley. No one's.
No, I just criticize Kenny for playing Boros because Kenny is my friend and I obviously have to give him shit.
My Merfolk deck scares her.
No one's gonna criticize you for you know.
The Commander one does.
Like one of my favorite color combinations. I know it's one of your favorite color combinations too, Haley. Is Demir.
Yeah.
And Black Blue has so
Haley likes-
many different combinations of things you can do. I don't think I've seen a Black Blue deck that's exactly the same as another Black Blue deck.
For example, when it comes to, so just using Black Blue in particular as an example, I have 3 different commander decks that all have Black Blue commanders, and all 3 of them do very different things.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, any deck that you can think of that you want to play, you can build it and you can play it however you want. There are a million different, even deck builds that are like theoretically the same. So like the mono red deck, there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of different versions of a mono red deck.
Right.
Yeah.
You can play anything you want. You can put together anything you want. And anybody that tells you otherwise, just fuck 'em.
I can think of 3 off the top of my head, actually.
Yeah.
Burn, Aggro, and Big Red, which is like a mid-range deck that just plays a whole bunch of big red things like dragons.
Yeah.
Are you sure it's not a cinnamon flavored gum? Sponsored by Big Red.
No, not sponsored
Call
by
us up
Big Red.
today for sponsorship, Big Red. We'll talk about this deck every week.
But yeah, like even mono, like just first and foremost, Magic is a game, and play what you have fun playing.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not having fun playing, it's not worth playing. So maybe you're trying to learn on this super complicated deck and you just can't get it, and so you do go to play a mono red. If you're having fun playing mono red, who cares if you're playing mono red?
Yeah.
Or if you're like me and there's very straightforward decks you can be playing and you choose the janky
jank.
runaround version of it that makes sense half the time and nobody else understands what you're doing, then play the deck that nobody else understands
or
what
if
you're
you're
doing.
like
As
me,
long
that,
as you're
like,
having fun doing it,
You
do
know,
it.
if you're like me, you're like, I have this specific mechanic I want to do, and I want to do it really well. what colors? Well, yeah, Eternalize. I love bringing Eternalized creatures back. I love the Amonkhet block. But anyway, I got this specific mechanic I want to do. I got these specific cards I love. I'm gonna build around those handful of cards. That's another way you can do it too. Because you see your favorite card pop up, it's like, hey, old friend, and then hopefully the control deck you're playing doesn't just obliterate it instantly, and you get to play that card.
And if you like watching your opponent squirm because they can't get into their own rhythm, you can play like that too.
Yes, exactly. I play control. I should be complaining. So, as I play control all the time. God, I built a Talrand Sky Summoner commander deck for a friend of mine. It's got 14 counter spells in it, and it literally in one-on-one play, it's just deny what you're doing, deny what every turn, just no, and you just lose to attrition. Every time, did I mention every time he counters a spell, he gets a drink? My life sucks.
There are millions of different decks you can build, but that's also why it's important to know the turns of a step, because you might not know what your opponent's playing. Your opponent might not know what you're playing, so it's just let them know what you're doing. Let them know what's going on.
If you got nowhere... So, Haley, if I have nowhere to start, I'm a brand new player, I want to build a new deck from scratch, where can I look on the interwebs, aside from Move to Combat, for advice?
There are quite a few websites.
Yeah.
Really, YouTube in general is a useful tool.
Yep.
People do deck techs all of the time, all sorts of different deck techs. If you're looking for how to build commander decks, EDH Rec is a really good one.
Definitely.
It takes a bunch of different deck lists and shows you the synergies.
Not deep dive into Commander if that's your first format.
Oh yeah, if Commander's your first format, don't deep dive,
don't
man.
play
Just
Commander.
take it easy. But
we'll
MTG,
do a Commander episode some other time.
Yeah, that's
MTG Goldfish is typically
Out.
has a lot of places. Deck lists. Tapped Out, Star City Games.
Yes.
Channel Fireball. There are so many websites that do so many news about different deck techs and whatnot. Wizards of the Coast themselves has a lot of resources, and your local game store has a lot of resources.
Yeah, I was about to say,
as
and
well.
honestly, one of your best inputs and advice you could get for your deck is, if you have a good play group with supportive players, is, hey, I want to do blank. Like, I'm a very aggressive player. I want to fight people all the time. They'll be like, have you looked at this deck? This might be good for you, have you checked out that?
And net decking is not a shameful thing.
Net decking is not a shameful
Net
thing.
decking means...
Not even in the slightest.
If you find a deck online that you like, do not let anybody else say that you are less than a player
people
for
tease
it.
people all the time for net decking, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, net decking is to go online, find a deck list, and then build that deck list because either you liked it, it won a lot, you like the person who built it. It doesn't matter what reason you net deck for. If you need a net decking is also a really good place for newer players to start when they don't know how to build a deck or what kind of deck they want to build. That's a great place to start because you have a deck list sitting in front of you, something that's already been played, is tried and true, and it's doing something right. So if you're going to build that deck list, that's a really good place to start where it's like, man, I really want to play.
It's also a great place to learn how a deck works.
Correct.
Right. And if you want to do totally the opposite and just make some janky out there newfangled thing that no one's ever seen before, people do it. It's not going to work.
It's not going to happen. No, it's not even. It's not going to work. There are millions and millions and millions and millions upon millions of deck lists out there. Somebody's gonna have a similar idea to you. You're never gonna.
No, I meant if you want to go out there and not do a net deck, and you show up to your local competition with a not net deck, there's a slight possibility, a small one, that no one's going to be prepared for what you're doing because no one has seen it before, and they're just like, what is this monstrosity before me?
That's why you played Jank.
Like, my favorite anecdote is when vehicles first came out, everybody thought there was a gimmick, and I'm like, sweet, I get to drive cars and Magic. So I built a vehicles deck, and it turned out that the vehicles decks turned out to be one of the best decks of that meta. And the first competition I was in, at my local game store, I came in third place, which I had never even placed before, because nobody was ready for this deck, So there's always cutting edge stuff coming out. Chances are it's already been thought of, but Go with your gut. If you're like me and you like to march to a beat of a different drummer, there's a place for you in Magic too.
Yeah.
You don't have to play the net deck, and you shouldn't make fun of people playing the net deck.
Yeah.
Or decks, I should say.
Yeah. Another good resource too of places to look for is your local game store. If you have a local
Absolutely.
game store that deals heavily in Magic, as quite a few of them do, chances are most of the employees there are pretty knowledgeable. They're not going to be perfect and they're not going to know everything, obviously, but they can at the very, very least offer you a different insight to your deck that you might have not seen yourself before.
Right.
Most of them know pretty well what they're talking about, especially if they handle Magic a lot, or they see these cards, so or they know what players are playing.
Right.
So if they're running standard tournaments at their store, or they're running any sort of tournament at their store, they know the cards that people are most often playing, most often buying.
Yeah, it's
so
like
they have
it's
that
like a
information
pro
there
shop
that's ready
for
for you.
golfers, but for
Yeah.
Magic.
So
pretty much.
and most of, if not all of them, are more than willing to help you with that kind of stuff.
Well, it's their job.
Well, it's their job.
And- and
It's
it's their
not even just the
passion,
fact
too.
that their job. It's most
They-
of these people are just actively ready to help you.
Right.
Yeah. And even if like the players at your local game store usually will help you out.
Yes.
Most people are more than happy to get new players into their store.
Oh yeah.
Like if you wanna join in, you don't have to go right into competitions. You can just go to play.
Correct.
In fact, a lot of local game stores have special events for people who just want to go and play.
Or
Yeah.
for first time players.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's a lot of players in general too who will show up for an event early just so they can get
Yeah,
extra games in
absolutely.
with people. Like people who don't even want to play in the tournament, but they're still up there playing games with them.
Yeah.
And then there's always your kitchen table Magic players that might have a group that just play.
That meet at their
random
house and
Magic.
play. Yeah. Another really good resource too that not everybody thinks of or knows how to access, but any Magic judge. There is several websites where you can look them up. You can look them up on Facebook on like the Wizards Judge page. There's a website, Judge Apps, which has like a lot of them listed there. Most of the judges and most of the ones that I know are more than willing to help you on their free time. Just like if you, most of the time, I know that the regional coordinators, like their emails are on Judge Apps or some other websites where it's available, where they're like the regional coordinator. That's what they're there for. They're there to answer your questions. They want to answer your questions. They want to help you learn to love this game as much as we love this game.
Yeah.
So, you don't have to use that, but know that they are there for that. Or any employee at a local game store, any players at a local game store, most of them are more than willing to help you out.
Mm-hmm.
We love this game. We want other people to love this game as much as we love this game. It's an addiction, and we want to get you hooked.
That's why it's called Five Color Crack. It's great.
Cardboard Crack.
Cardboard Crack.
It's
Five
totally
Color
a
Crack.
song, not to plug some other podcast, but it's totally a song by Billy the Fridge, and it's awesome. But anyway, what are we talking about next week, Haley?
So next week, we're going to be doing more of a standard-based episode. So for last week, we did a commander-based one.
We've kind of been just talking about War the Spark, Commander, and just general stuff.
Yeah. In case you couldn't tell, Kenny and I's favorite formats are Standard and Commander. But with the new set coming out last week, we're starting to see some stuff happen with the cards that are moving into Standard. And so we want to talk about that. Maybe tell you like what decks we're playing, what decks are seeing a lot of play, how the meta is shaping up to be, etc.
What we think the meta is gonna kind of shake down to be like. It's super open right now.
Yeah, what the differences between the decks
Yeah.
are, why some
Yeah.
decks are seeing more play, why some are working better than others. Just all the fun stuff.
And
All the fun standard stuff.
maybe we'll talk about some jank.
We're gonna talk about some jank because if you've seen any deck I play, it's jank.
Yeah.
It's totally not traditional, so you can almost always guarantee that we're gonna be talking about some sort of jank on this show.
Of course.
But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up today's episode.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was gonna say if you guys, once again, if you have any questions, feel free to message us on any one of our social media platforms. Comment in the YouTube down below. Message us.
Like and subscribe.
And if you like the show, hit the like button.
Yeah.
I almost said like a boss. Got him. Jacksepticeye's influence permeates everything. But anyway, we're here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can tweet us at 2_combat. You can find us here at Twitch TV /Move to Combat. On our Twitter page, you can also find all of our back episodes as well as links to our YouTube. You can email us at movetocombatpodcast@gmail.com. We have a Move to Combat page on Facebook you can search up. If you liked our intro music, you can find it at soundcloud.com/James Shibe. That's James SHAIEB. That's me. Our opening track features local rapper Ron Bilas. If you like role-playing games, we have a sister podcast called Brave Yet Stupid that airs on Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can check it out at twitch.tv/Brave Yet Stupid. Anything else you guys want to add?
No. Just
Nope.
let us know what you guys are thinking, what you want to see next.
Yeah.
If there's anything specific you want to see, or just anything of that nature. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Yep. We're always looking for ideas.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Night.